Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer your questions today, particularly you upper tier patrons. Upper tier patron emailed in via the website and said, when you talk about childhood attachment problems that cause personality disorders that don't include obvious abuse, could that include growing up as a child of divorce with two different parenting styles? The answer is yeah, absolutely. Not only divorce can cause issues, even when you do it really well, because the child is like, so wait, you guys loved each other and now you don't, and you're moving out. Is that going to happen to me? You know, young children, it's all about them, and which is natural, a very narcissistic stage of life. And when they see you rejecting each other, it raises this notion that, wait, so I might get rejected. And it for some kids, it can really cause a lot of damage, even when you do everything just right. It's hard to know what to do with kids. It's hard to know how they're going to interpret things. Even when you talk with them about, sometimes they just misinterpret. So it's just hard to know. Consult with a family therapist that knows a lot about this. Do the best you can. The thing that I always say is the best you can do as a parent is condemn your child to the minimum of 5 years of therapy. You're never going to parent a child in a way that they won't need some therapy for. So what you're shooting for is 5 years, because that's not that much. What you're trying to avoid is 25 years of therapy to deal with the damage that you did. So there's always messiness, there's always mistakes, there's always bad moments. Kids are weird, they ask for a lot of things, they misinterpret things. You're busy, it's just hard. So anyway, your question is, will different parenting styles cause problems? Yeah, it could, absolutely. Is it automatic? No, but as a child, you're going from home to home, and at the very least, it's inconsistent. You're like, so I don't understand how the world works, particularly if you're really young. And also, when you go to the more strict home, you might experience a lot of discipline and a lot of disapproval that can be very confusing to you, because you're like, well, in the other home, I'm fine. And it takes a while to kind of get used to things. You might also feel bad about yourself because of that. And you might also feel like, well, does this mean my parents hate each other? You kind of get that vibe, like they're on different planets and what's going on here. You might even hear grumblings about the parents, about the other parents' parenting style. And this is why it is absolutely critical that when parents go through divorce, that they stay in a good relationship with each other when they have kids, so that they can communicate about parenting, coordinate together. Not every parent has to parent exactly the same way, but they have to support each other and not undermine each other and not confuse the child. All right, next question. Anonymous upper tier patron emailed in and asked me, in your professional opinion, is it impractical for couples to wait until after marriage to inhabit the same space? End of email. I don't know what you mean by inhabit. Do you mean like cohabitation? Do you mean, is it impractical for couples to wait until after marriage to live together? Well, no, it's not. I don't know what you mean by impractical. I think what you might be asking is, it stands to reason that if you want to really find the right person and vet that person, living with them is a good way to vet them. And until you live with them, do you really know what they're going to be like when you decide to commit to marriage or something? And yeah, there's a lot of wisdom to that, but statistics don't necessarily show that. In fact, statistics actually show that people who cohabitate before marriage are more likely to get divorced in the future. Correlation doesn't mean causation. There's a lot of confounds there that I won't go into. But so the point is that not living together doesn't seem to raise your risk of divorce later. There are other reasons that will contribute, other risk factors that will contribute to divorce likelihood. So, everyone's different. And when you look around the world, especially, there are people who barely know each other when they get married, and they're happily married for the rest of their lives. There's also the opposite, where they're set up in arranged marriages and they're miserable. And so it's hard to know. Humans are flexible, variable. There's lots of different customs. And in fact, I had a friend in college that was having a string of really difficult relationships. And he, one time late at night, over beers, and he's like, he was a very philosophical guy. And he's like, I figured it out. I figured out the key to having a happy relationship, which is, what we're all looking for. And so the next time I meet a woman that I get kind of, that maybe it's like in the first month and we seem to be getting along, I'm going to get married right away, because when we start running into conflict, we'll be married and we'll have to work it out, because every time I fall in love and then stuff starts to happen and then we're not married. And so we just like fly apart. But if I do that the rest of my life, I'm never going to find a partner. So I'm going to lock it down. And I just remember thinking, I guess there is some logic to that, but it doesn't sound appealing, because what if you roll the dice and you get it wrong? But I don't know. Each to their own. They can live together or not before they get married. All right, this next question is from the Discord server. Meta asked, I'm reminded of this Atlantic article from a little while back titled, Why Some People Respond to Stress by Falling Asleep. I also do this at times, so it was validating to learn it wasn't just a me thing. End of comment. Yeah, absolutely. So I actually noticed this when I was in high school. I'm a very stage fright sort of person and have always been, still am, and was particularly that way when I was young. And for some reason, I also kind of wanted to be on the stage at times. Like I would volunteer to be in plays or talent shows. And then like, as I was going on stage, I was like, I've made a huge mistake, a la Arrested Development. I didn't know anyone else that got as nervous as I did. As a very stressed out person in high school, I noted that as I was going on stage, I would start to yawn a lot, like over and over again. I'm like, this is so weird. Like I feel tired. I feel like I want to fall asleep. And over time, I figured, oh, this must be a stress response. I don't know anyone else who does this, but it only happens when I am having massive anxiety. So later on, I learned about the various different ways that we respond to stress and threat. And we've all heard about fight or flight, right? So fight, flight, freeze. I used to say appease because it so you have fight or flight and freeze or appease. But then when we started adding more Fs, it made sense if we tried to figure out all F words. There's a great F word, fawn, when you fawn over someone. So when you fawn, this is a trauma response, usually when children are abused and made to feel as though it's best if they appease, if they fawn after their abuser. Then later on in life, when they are abused, they might fawn. So it might be a very confusing response for trauma survivors. It's like, why am I appeasing? Why am I fawning over these abusers? I mean, those are the people I should be running from. Well, it's a learned response because it worked to reduce the danger when they were young, and so they respond that way. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And then we have fatigue, and then we have faint. So fatigue is one of the F words, and we can have a fatigue response to stress, which is what I was having, yawning, or being very sleepy, or even falling asleep under stress. And then we have faint, which is just like actually going unconscious, which I also have done before in my life a few times. All right, Zosha from Discord says, Dr. Kirk, I'd love to hear your take on romanticizing mental illness in the age of social media. Well, I don't know exactly what you mean, Zosha, by romanticizing of mental illness. I'm guessing what you mean is when people will claim that they have a mental illness when they probably don't. Like there seems to be a fair amount of people faking that they have dissociative identity disorder on TikTok. I did a whole episode on that, and it's hard to know, of course, but it seems likely, at least some of the claims. And the thing about that is that when we look at that, it looks bad, right? It's like, ew, gross. But when I look at that, I think it's actually a good sign. It's not great that it's happening, and there's a lot of problems with it. But what it means is that 25 years ago, when I entered the field, I fully understood, because everyone was telling me, and I was looking at research, that we have a massive stigma problem regarding not only mental illness, but mental conditions or attachment or emotional problems and relationship problems. And I thought that we needed to fight against it. And of course, a lot of other people already had been fighting against it. So there was a lot of activism around destigmatizing mental conditions and just general emotional issues, such that now in 2022, we have really reduced a fair amount of the stigma. As a result of that, and I didn't think this would happen, then mental conditions can become kind of trendy because of the destigmatization, because we are giving so much love and attention and acceptance to people that have mental issues. people want that attention now. And so they might fake a mental condition as a way of getting some of that destigmatized love and attention and acceptance that is there. And is it great? No, but it's a good sign. You know what I mean? So that's what I think about that. L says, what do you think of Dr. Phil? Yeah, I don't know Dr. Phil. He's been on the air for what, 30 years, 20 years. I have probably seen a total of 2 hours, maybe 1.5 hours of what he does. So I can't really make a judgment. I did a whole reaction video to one of his episodes a year ago or so. And I got a fair picture of what he was like from that. So you can see that on YouTube. And what I'll say is that, what do I think of him? I'm guessing he is doing some good. And from my memory, in the episode I watched, there was a minority of moments where I thought, okay, that's fine, that's good. But there's a lot of what I would say is, in my opinion, is very destructive to not only the individuals on the stage, but also to our society. The things that I saw was, he's not a therapist, and I don't even think he claims to be. I think he might even lean, I don't know, but the way he comes across is more like an entertainer / judger of people. There's many moments, I think, on the show where, say, for example, they have a teenager and a parent, and the teenager is very rebellious, right? And as the teenager is saying their stuff, cash me outside, that kind of thing, the audience is booing, oh, that teenager, that's grumble. And then Dr. Phil will very calmly, in his Southern charmish way, will go after the teenager, and the crowd will clap, and everyone's, that teenager needs to be put in her place. And any therapist that knows anything knows that that is not what helps. It doesn't help the kid. It doesn't help the family. It doesn't help society. It's not going to help. That's not how these things work. If judgment and ridicule worked, then the kid would probably already be, scared straight, so to speak. And so what helps is to get to understand why this child or whoever is on stage is presenting with this tough exterior, because they're using that to protect something. Every single person I've ever known or worked with who presents that way always is protecting something very, very vulnerable to them, very scary to them, very humiliating to them. And sometimes it's almost impossible to detect or even imagine. There are people that come across as extremely hostile and barriered, and you just don't like them. And every time, and I would say, I don't know, maybe half the time, a quarter of the time, I'll be convinced. I'll be like, okay, this person has no gushy core. They have no mushy insides. They have no inner child. They're just a jerk face. But we go down the road, and then boom, we see it. Like with 90 Day Fiancé, for example, this season with Eve and Muhammad. Muhammad came across very stoic, and I was starting to wonder if he had any vulnerability or any feelings at all, particularly in these most recent. I'm watching. It's just like we just saw the episode in which he basically told Eve that he doesn't really want to be with her. He just wants a green card so he can work. And so I was starting to wonder if he had no feelings. And then he started to cry when he was with his friend, talking about how he really misses his mom, and he wants to get the ball rolling more quickly so he can get back home and start working. And so now there's a question as to whether or not he actually wants to be with Eve, but the question as to whether or not he has a vulnerable center or some pain or anxiety that is driving his stoic behavior and his insensitive behavior, the question has been answered that he does. It doesn't mean that he's right, but it means that there's an inner child there that is, or an inner, like I said, mushiness that is being protected by it. So when Dr. Phil goes after these people and just starts ridiculing them, I think it just gives that child more reason to have a tough exterior and to feel more worthless, and therefore even less likely to be vulnerable, but it satisfies the audience clearly, and it satisfies the viewer. Everyone wants a villain, and so this show presents them on a platter. Dr. Phil is the hero and goes after them, and that's what I think of Dr. Phil. UCats on Discord says, why is OCD in cluster C and not cluster A? And then Adults Have Order asks another question, why would it even be in cluster A? So first off, it's not OCD, it's OCPD. Remember, there's a difference. Listen to my whole deep dive on OCPD. And regarding the clusters, you know, I talked about this before. I don't get any of the clusters. I've never gotten any of the clusters. I don't understand. One, why do we need clusters? Two, the clusters are basically based on behavioral observation. And I've never been a fan of seeing personality disorders that way, because when we look at behavioral markers, which is what the whole DSM is based on, which I understand and I get that, and I stand by it as one way of looking at this sort of thing. But I struggled to understand personality disorders for years as an early clinician until I just randomly started to treat people with personality disorders and discover what was actually underneath the personality disorder. And I was like, oh, I get it. All of the stuff that's listed in the DSM is a behavioral manifestation of an emotional experience, a schema, a distortion that was developed when they were early in life. And when you understand that distortion, when you understand that emotional experience and the pain that they're going through, it explains the behavior. And that's why personality disorders will really look very differently. So the fact that we have a cluster of personality disorders that present in odd and eccentric ways, like that doesn't tell us anything about the personality disorder, right? You have to understand what's at its core. So there's that. So I don't know why OCPD is in whatever cluster it is. I can't even actually tell you what cluster it is because I don't care. The only cluster I know is cluster B because it gets talked about so often, with histrionic, borderline, narcissistic, and antisocial. And that's another thing. Why is antisocial lumped in with narcissism, histrionic, and borderline? Antisocial has nothing to do with those. Now, behaviorally, you might be able to, they might look similar, right? Because antisocial psychopathic people might have emotional volatility. They often are narcissistic. I'm just trying to think what other commonalities they would have with the other cluster B. But anyway, point is I never, maybe occasionally I'll say cluster B referring to histrionic, narcissism, and borderline because they are very similar to me. But paranoid is pretty similar to those three as well, but it's not in cluster B. So yeah, I don't know why any of the clusters are the way that they are, and I don't like it. I don't think that way, and I find it to be confusing. I find it to actually mislead people. Personality disorders each one of them are so complicated and so hard to understand that I think reducing them to three categories somehow makes it easier to swallow for people, but I think that's misguided. All right, next question from Alex on Discord. Dr. Kirk, I heard a rumor that a recession is coming up. Is it a bad idea to join an MFT program, a marriage and family therapy program, during or after a recession as someone who was a therapist during the 2008 recession? Well, good question, Alex. I will tell you, as a professor during the recession in 2008, that a lot of people go to graduate school during a recession. I think it's because people are like, well, the job market isn't that great. I might as well go back to school. So there might be more competition actually to get into a program. And I think another wise aspect of this is that by the time you graduate, the recession might be lifted and thus the job market might be better. Anonymous upper tier patron emailed in and said, when I was 13 years old, I was removed from public school due to homelessness, my mother's remarriage, and religious beliefs of my mother. I lived in one hotel room with my mom and brother for months, and it was not a nice hotel. My brother was allowed to continue public school, and my mother continued working, so I was alone and isolated in a hotel room for 12 plus hours a day. And I was traumatized by that, which I am exploring in therapy. I am also an intern as a school social worker, and I have noticed similar impacts on kiddos during the COVID-19 pandemic, including depression and anxiety. What are the impacts of isolation on youth development? End of email. Yeah, so people have already been talking about this, speculating and noticing anecdotally that children have been suffering during the pandemic regarding isolation, cut off from their friends, the fear of death, people dying around them, the political problems we've experienced, and other issues that have happened that are really quite unique, or at least uniquely intense right now. And we're starting to see data pointing at those effects that people were seeing anecdotally. And over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of research come out and long-term effects. The high schoolers of the past 2 years, 10 years from now, they're going to be in the workforce, and we're going to see effects there too. And so you're asking me, what are the impacts that this could have? Well, many, many bad impacts, of course, and because you went through that, anonymous upper tier patron yourself. So yeah, pretty awful things. And things weren't great to begin with, right? With the rising suicide rates and increase in depression and anxiety anyway. Kids were isolated anyway, more so than they have ever been. It was already a problem, and it's really become a bigger problem. Social skill deficits, learning setbacks. I have friends who work in schools, and they're just like, all of our kids are basically 1 or 2 years behind. And what do we do? And, that's a problem, right? All right, this next email, anonymous upper tier patron, she says, I've recently been wondering about the origins that drive my non-normative sexuality and if they are a mechanism of my insecure attachment. You have referred to non-monogamy as possibly being an identity, and this comment really resonated with me and has me wondering if this is part of my identity. I am worried that my interest in non-monogamy is a result of my attachment insecurities. So hypothetically, as I become more secure, I would no longer retain an interest in non-monogamy. I have made a lot of progress in my therapy, and overall, I believe I am reasonably secure, but I still struggle with this a lot and would feel very comforted by your view and insights. End of email. Yeah. Well, it's hard to know, of course, but you are asking the right questions, which is that you feel an attraction to non-monogamy. It sounds like you're not in that world and haven't actually explored it fully, because it can be complicated. And once you try it on for size, it might not be for you, but it might be perfect for you. You just have to try it on if you can. And the question you have is, is my attraction to non-monogamy based on insecure attachment, meaning that I'm running from being in a monogamous committed relationship because that scares me, and I'm only attracted to non-monogamy because of that. Yeah, that happens all the time to us. Now, that doesn't invalidate it though. Say you, in your therapy, you're still recovering from your attachment injuries, and you're like, yeah, I think I'm going to go with non-monogamy. You go with non-monogamy, you continue to recover from your attachment injuries, and say 5 years from now, suddenly you realize, you know what? I think I was only non-monogamous because I was trying to avoid relationships and vulnerability and being abandoned. So I was spreading myself everywhere so that I wouldn't be hurt by anyone. So, and then at that point, you're like, okay, I'm going to be monogamous now. I never was non-monogamous, but I did live that way. And ultimately, I'm monogamous. And if that happened, it's not a problem, right? You're doing the best you can with the information that you have before you. Now, I will say that if people out there don't know what we're talking about right now, is I do believe, and I'm not the only one, people in the know will talk about non-monogamy, as anonymous upper tier patron says, as an identity, meaning that it's either something that people are born with or they developed into. It's in their bones, in the same way that being gay or hetero is, or bisexual is. Once people are given the freedom to choose for themselves and explore for themselves, people will land somewhere along those lines, or they will morph over time with the freedom of being able to do that. So, for example, I am monogamous, and I know that I'm not non-monogamous, in that I don't have any urge to be with other people. I just want to be with my wife. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. In fact, it doesn't sound very pleasant to me, non-monogamy. But I work with a lot of non-monogamous, polyamorous people, and they seem perfectly suited for it. They seem like they were born into it. And a very similar process will happen for people who discover that they're gay, right? That they were socialized to be heterosexual, and that's the norm, the heteronormative society. Like, oh, okay, I'm a boy, so I'm supposed to like girls. Okay, I guess I'll like girls. And then, but fantasies start to come in, or they have a guy friend that they're starting to have warm feelings towards. They're like, well, wait, I kind of feel like when a love song comes on, I kind of want to sing it to my best friend, not to my girlfriend. What's happening? There'll be this emerging awareness that is breaking through the oppression, and the identity is shining through. And so with non-monogamous people, it's a similar process. They're shoved into a monogamous box, and over time they start to, the identity of non-monogamy starts to shine through. They're like, I love my partner and I don't want to leave him, but I cannot imagine being with one person the rest of my life. And it just seems like, couldn't we just be with other people? I mean, isn't that okay? Like, am I weird? Am I a slut? What's wrong? Am I avoiding? What's going on with me? You explore, and you're like, no, actually, I think it's just the way I'm oriented. I love my partner, and I love to be attached, and I want to commit to this person maybe for the rest of my life, but I also want to be with other people, and I want my partner to be with other people. There's so many people in the world to experience romantically and sexually that I can't live in a one-person world. I want to live in a multi-person world. And so that emerging awareness of one's identity will come through. Were they born that way? Did they develop that way? Are we all that way? These are questions for the ages, I suppose. But at the very least, when you give people flexibility, there's a place where they feel at home. I feel at home as a monogamous person completely. I would not feel at home in non-monogamy. I have clients and friends who are definitely at home as a polyamorous, non-monogamous person. So yeah. You're exploring that upper tier patron, you're in therapy, it'll just take time, and you're asking the right questions. And it can be tough though, because what do you do if you're in a relationship, right? If you're in a relationship and you love your partner and you're like, I think I'm non-monogamous, what do you do, right? It's tough, and therapy. All right, this next email is a long one, but I think it's really a good one. Upper tier patron Liz from quote unquote beautiful Salt Lake City. I heard that Salt Lake is starting to dry up and that lake smelled bad to begin with. I can't imagine what it smells like now. But yeah, Salt Lake is a lovely city. She says, I loved your episode on codependency. Your definition was exactly my conceptualization of codependency. I realized a funny pattern while listening to your episode. My ADHD symptoms can sometimes attract codependents who see me as needing help. I'm very self-sufficient and have a great life, but sometimes I exude a chaotic energy with my ADHD. For example, my hair is often slightly rumpled. I wear lots of patterns and colors that bring me joy, but sometimes don't match. I'm messy and I lose track of time easily. I've learned a combination of meds and coping strategies that work for me. People who can roll with it see me as delightful, fun, and entertaining. But I've had many people try to fix me, and it used to drive me crazy. The most recent example is one of my teacher friends that I work with. Her whole life is organized and scheduled. Her hair is always perfect, and her style is immaculate. When we ate lunch, she often commented on how my lunch was either whatever was being served at the school or a frozen meal from Trader Joe's. She invited me over and over again to do meal prep with her. She said, it's cheaper and healthier, is what she would say. I would usually blow it off because my food choices are not breaking the bank, and honestly, they're healthy enough for me. Finally, one day I said, friend, I want to fully acknowledge that your way is better, but I will literally lose my mind if I have to plan all my meals out in advance. She laughed, and she still mentions it sometimes, but it's much more playful now. I was reflecting on this experience during the episode that you did on codependency, And now I see she was playing out a codependency dynamic that's probably present in other relationships she's had. And it's a dynamic people have tried to rope me into before. I've had enough therapy at this point to know that I'm okay as is. My life is together enough, although I do continually have to work on my ADHD. If you have any advice on how to ward off this behavior, I'd love to hear it. But I have a feeling that my wonderful messiness will keep attracting codependent people. Does my ADHD attract unwanted overfunctioners? End of email. Yeah, great email. Perfect. You get it. Everything's there. I don't have to answer your question. You already know the answer to your question. One, how do you deal with people like this? You know how to do it. I mean, you did it perfectly. Your friend was, it's their issue. It's not yours. And yeah, you know that you will attract people like this, but you're okay. You like yourself, and yeah, you're a little messy, but you're not dysfunctional, and you stand on your own 2 feet, and you own it. And then a codependent person is triggered by you because you remind them of someone that they had to take care of, that they were forced to take care of when they were growing up. And so it triggers them, and they feel a lot of anxiety, and they start to obsess about you and micromanage you. And you blow them off. Now, okay, but you don't get triggered. Okay, you don't become an underfunctioner, which a lot of people will do. They'll be like, oh, okay, and might even become more disheveled and more dysfunctional, so that the overfunctioner you could both lock into those roles. But you didn't do that. And then when it got too much, and you didn't want to lose your friend, because you could have just distanced yourself from her, but you didn't want to lose her. And so you said, hey, you know what? Your way, I acknowledge, is better, but I just can't do that. So thanks anyway. And you had a laugh, and everything's great now. She understands you, because when you did that, you were competent in your response. When dysfunctional people, when underfunctioners respond, I mean, just think about 90 Day Fiancé people. Think about Nicole, because I don't know if she's an underfunctioner, but she certainly presents that way. I don't know if you remember Nicole and Azan, but when Nicole would interact with her mom, Nicole would just slip into this childish, incompetent way of talking, just not only sounding like a child, like a very small child, but also the way she talked about her decision-making just would suck in anyone that would be like, no, Nicole, you can't, you have a child, like don't, and particularly the mom. And so when you stand on your own 2 feet and you say, hey, I get it. If Nicole, if you're familiar, she was a young single parent and had a mom that seemingly was in a over-functioning role for Nicole. And Nicole's life, according to many, was kind of a train wreck. And so imagine if Nicole had said something like, Mom, I totally get that you think that my life is, I'm not living my life well, and that I'm making some bad choices. And I respect that, and I hear you. And I would feel the same way if I were you, and thank you for caring and loving me. But I love him. I love Azan. And yes, there's a chance that things aren't going to work. There's a lot of reasons to believe it's not going to work. But I believe it will work, because I've seen him in a way that you haven't seen him. And this love is so special to me that I want to see this through. Just imagine if Nicole had said something like that to the mom. It exudes competence. So you don't have to say, get out of my life, to your friend, to your, you're always trying to micromanage me. Knock it off. Okay, that's more like a teenager. You also don't want to appease it and just be like, oh, okay, I'll do whatever you want. Okay. So you're asserting yourself, and you're owning it, right? You're like, yeah, you know what? I'm kind of messy, and yeah, I don't eat as healthy as you do. And yeah, you'd eat more healthy than me. And if I did your system, I would benefit, but I just can't do that. It's just not my style. And thank you for offering. It's competence. It's peer to peer. You're standing on your feet. You already did that, so you already know how to do it. But then you also say, does your ADHD attract unwanted overfunctioners? Yes, you also know that already. But yeah, I guess more generally for all you out there, if you have some kind of noticeable problem, like common issues would be you work too much, or you are disorganized, or you have a drinking problem, or an emotional problem, or you have financial problems, or I don't know, you have issues parenting. Something, there's a lot of those kinds of issues are, I guess, common enough. And you find that you attract people, or you might even have permanent people in your life that just seem to be overly obsessed with helping you and invading. This is an over-functioning, under-functioning dynamic that is destructive for everyone. And there's a lot of ways out of it. And listen to all my episodes, and obviously go to therapy for it. But everything I was saying earlier applies to those relationships as well. Anyway, all right. Well, so that's that episode. And tune in next time when we talk about something else, or I continue to answer questions. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.